Well, hello, everybody. We are back with another Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports. And I'm Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports. And I'm with my friend Cherie Turner from Strides Forward Podcast. And I'm going to ask you how you're doing this week again.
I am doing very well, Elizabeth. And my update for this video is I want to focus on some positive things because I feel like I've been, a little bit focusing on some negative things recently. And there's some great things going on in women in sports. And this feeds directly into our media topic today. So I'm just going to start off by saying that there were some excellent wins in the women's sports arena over the last week or so. There were two world championships in boxing, one by Irish women, which was very, very exciting. Amy Broadhurst and Lisa O'Rourke became world champions in the 63 kilogram and 70 kilogram categories, respectively. And there was also a young woman, a high school student in track and field, who broke 2 minutes in the 800 meter. She's only the second high school student to ever do that. Her name is
Wow.
Juliet Whitaker. And the first one was Mary Kane, whose name is probably familiar to lots and lots of people because even outside of track and field, she was quite famous. And I don't even know how to describe how fast that is running under 2 minutes for 800 meters, but it's really, really fast. I mean, that's half a mile. That's a sub 4 minute pace over half a mile, over the distance of half a mile. So it's incredibly fast. And something that all three of these performances have in common is that they were all broadcast live on free YouTube channels.
Oh,
And
wow.
that is what gets us. Yes, exactly. And that's what kind of feeds into our media section today. We're going to pick up with that idea in a few minutes. But so I got to watch all of those things. I got to watch them live. I have never sat down and tuned into a video of women boxing in the middle of the day, for free. Because I follow Her Sport, which is out of Ireland, and they cover women's sports internationally, but they really focus on Irish athletes. Because I follow them, I knew that there was a broadcast of the boxing matches and I could tune in. And because I follow CETS May on Instagram and also lots of other running channels, including Fast Women and lots of other outlets, I knew that there were these track meets that were going on that I could watch live for free. And so it was super exciting. So I had women's sports available to me that were easy to tune into, and there was great commentary. And I got to watch some epic performances. So
That's
that
awesome.
is my super upbeat news. How about you?
Well, I want to ask you a couple questions about that. So, can we go back and watch replays? Is that available on?
Yes, you
Oh,
can.
okay.
I do believe so. I checked in on those channels and I do believe so. So I'll post the links to those. And there was also, I will add another really cute, or yes, it was a very cute thing that was posted on Her Sport. And that was Lisa O'Rourke getting a call from Katie Taylor after she won her world championships. And Lisa O'Rourke had also just won the U22 World Championships a few months prior. And this was her first World Championships as a senior. And so, I mean, it was just
Oh,
the whole
wow.
thing was just absolutely incredible. And Her Sport, kept up with all of it. And they have a nice video of Lisa getting this call from Katie Taylor. And it was just wonderful. So, and you can see all of that. Yes, you can
That's
see all of
cool.
that.
That's
Yeah.
cool. Well, my news is very similar. So, in this past week, Ellen Van Dijk just set a new hour record. And for those who don't know, it's a cycling event that is done on the velodrome. And you basically go around and around and around for 1 hour.
Yeah. It's
And
brutal.
it is absolutely brutal. And, men who have done it and other people who have done it have described it as like the hour of hell, or the last, I don't know, just really just enormously painful. And part of the pain is because aerodynamics plays such a huge role in being able to beat the hour record. And you have to maintain that position without moving. So you get into this position that you've decided is the most aerodynamic position for you on your bike, and you stay rock solid, not moving. And Ellen Van Dijk had a position where, she has this aero helmet and she's not even looking up. I mean, apparently she could see 10 feet ahead of her. They were guessing 10 feet ahead of her.
Wow.
And so, like, no concept of the whole track, but just this black line that you're trying to follow, because the closer you stay on this black line, the shorter it is. You know, and yeah. And it was such an incredible performance by Ellen Van Dyke. But what really struck me was, how complicated attempting this is, because, you're doing it on a track. So you have to, I guess, rent the track. You have an incredibly expensive set of equipment that is really aerodynamic. So aerodynamic bike, helmet, socks that go over your shoes, and, the suit, and all of this stuff takes a ton of research. And then, of course, you've trained very specifically. So you're booking time on the track and, otherwise. And she apparently had a team of 15 people that were help.
Wow.
I know, exactly. So I just can't emphasize sort of like what a complicated endeavor this is for a single person to do. It's not like you're bringing a whole team of people for a team of riders. It's one rider who is making this attempt. So super complicated. And so what struck me watching her, and I watched it on TV, we watched it on our streaming platform that we did pay for. The commentary was excellent. They had two like super incredible people, one woman, one man. But anyway, what struck me was this would have been just unheard of in my day of cycling. Getting
Right.
a team of 15 people, like I'm just really like I can't even comprehend it.
Well, can I interrupt you to say that also you were a time trialist when
Right,
you were a professional cyclist. And
right.
so you can really identify with kind of how this feels, what it takes to prepare for something like this. Can you give us a little bit of insight into like I know you just were, but I'm just curious, like from your perspective of somebody who did specialize in this, just like what what you think of all of this.
I think it's super cool. And I think like I was watching it with my husband, and he kept on saying, I can't believe, she can stay rock solid and just follow the line. And I was like, I could have done that. That sounds, sure. I see that. No problem. Just because that's what I do. And I don't think I do much different when I'm doing a time trial on the road. I mean, the difference is on the track, it is, pancake flat, obviously, it's a track. So you are not moving at all.
Right.
But the same aerodynamic principles hold true on the road as well. And you see the men now, and also the women, but you see both of them, when they're doing the time trial on the road, they are super focused. And in fact, there have been crashes recently because, they're super focused. They're not looking up, and, they run into a truck or something like that. But yeah, it seemed really possible. And like it reminded me that I had this vague memory of somebody saying to me when I was racing, you should do the hour record. And I was like, a pasha, like I wouldn't have even known how to attempt it. And I mean, some of it is I wasn't on a team that had the support that Ellen Van Dyke is.
Right.
Ellen Van Dyke is on Trek Segafredo, and
Right.
like the whole. I mean, not only did she have a team of people, which included her coach and her boyfriend, and all that, but she also had Trek Segafredo was, I assume funding all of this. So I didn't have that, but also I hadn't put together a team, so it's partly on me. But I just think it's super fascinating that you know, it was part of her plan to do this, and she had the wherewithal, and the wherewithal existed to put this together, and for her to attempt it.
It's
It was
absolutely incredible.
fascinating. Yeah.
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 And I just imagine that the pressure
Oh my
that's
gosh.
something to deal with, right? Like you have these 15 people, you have all this time and money and effort and equipment, and it's all right there. And I mean, when I think about the razor thin margin of error
Yeah.
on something like that, right? Like it doesn't take much. Those bikes they're really twitchy, they're
Hmm.
not easy to handle, and
Yeah.
just like you really, like you have said many times, like you had to be rock solid
Yeah.
on that bike the entire time. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting to watch her towards the end because, like the last 15 minutes apparently is just dreadful and you're really falling apart. And you could see her, she was really wavering, up the track quite a lot. But, obviously she made it. But I think that's just part of it. You just start
Right.
to you start to suffer too much.
Yeah. More.
Yeah, but it was
Suffer
interesting. It's
more.
interesting you mentioned about the pressure because so Ellen Van Dyke before her, so she just did it just last week, and then the previous person who did it was Joss Loudon, and she did it in September 21. And then the
Mm.
person prior to that was Victoria Busi, who did it in October 2018. So huge gap. Probably, I guess that's that pandemic gap. But Victoria Busi did it on her third attempt
Oh,
and her third attempt was a day after her second attempt, and it was a lot of
whoa.
about the pressure, like all of this all of this prep, and all her people were down there, and she I think pretty much self-funded it. I mean, her aerodynamic suit was sponsored, but it sounded like a lot of it was self-funded. And then I discovered that in September 2015, an American that I had never heard of, Molly Van Schaefer Howling, uh, was coached by Dave Jordan, who was a New York City friend of mine. And I'm like, I've never heard of her. But anyway, so she did it and she had no sponsors. And she talked about sort of the benefit of not having sponsors and being able to choose whatever equipment that she wanted
Oh,
to do.
interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah. That's an issue in running a lot of times too,
sure.
because the big sponsors are the shoe sponsors. And if you don't run well in those shoes or you don't like them, oh, too bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I imagine having some freedom in your with no sponsors
Right.
would be helpful. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, super interesting. Anyway, I would like to do some more research about sort of how the women who have done it, the past 10 women who have done it, like sort of their process and their thinking process and how they managed it and stuff. I
yeah,
would
the
be really
mental
interested.
aspect of that to me just seems like it would be very wild and very interesting to talk to somebody
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're
So
going to move on to our media section, and I'm going to introduce it very briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. And so, what we're going to talk about this week is yet another sort of tangent from the ESPNW Summit and through one of their power talks. And we've talked about this one in past episodes, was with Nicole Lavoie, and she's with the Tucker Center for Research of Girls and Women in Sport. And in that power talk, she mentions the report that you and I read, and it was called Disrupt Hers, Driving a New Model for Women's Sports. And what we both liked about the Power Talk and also about the report is just how positive it is.
yes.
They definitely talk about the past crap of, women's sports not being supported, but really it's looking forward, like how is this going to change? What is changing? And the report leaves us with some things to do. But
Yes.
today we are talking about a very tiny portion of this report. This report is uh, 30 pages long. There are a lot of pictures, so it's shorter than that sounds, but it's still, it covers a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. So we are trying to keep things short, and we're only going to cover a little bit of it, and I am going to hand it to you.
Yeah, yeah. So I did cherry pick a few things that stood out for me. One thing I'm going to start off by saying, because I think it is very important to acknowledge, and I was frustrated to see this, is it does start out on page one showing us who is involved in this, and every single one of them is a white woman. And I just thought, I don't like that. I was very disappointed to see that they did not bring in some women of color, and yeah, because they do talk about diversity and the
Right.
importance of diversity in this report, and then there's no diversity amongst the people who came up with the report. So for the record, I just want to say that that's a bit frustrating. But overall, I love the positivity of it, because where I was left after reading this was that the future is now. Like, that's really how I feel. It's like there is an interest in women's sports. So there's no reason to talk about there's no interest in women's sports. We just need to keep moving the system forward and and showing what we already knew. So
Right.
that's very exciting to me. And One of the very first things that struck me was they talk a lot about the younger generation. They talk about how things are moving, how the younger generations are operating in the world, and they're speaking to that. So they really are looking toward the future and preparing for grabbing a hold of what's going to be happening. So one of the things they talk about is the fact that older generations used to look toward women to advance women in sports. And the younger generations are also looking toward men to help advance this forward. And I'll just read a brief quote. It says, while older generations tend to place responsibility for achieving gender equity on the shoulders of women, 59% of male Gen Zers believe it is men who have a larger role to play. And yeah, we need everybody on board.
Yeah. And
So,
I love
yes,
that
please.
sort of, confirms stuff that we've talked about in the past, and
Yes.
confirms, what my guest, Helena Gilbert Snyder, mentioned. And when I talked to her, was, like, she's looking to men. I just think it was so cool to read that. Anyway, and I also want to just clarify that the younger generation that they mostly talk about in this report are Gen Z generation, and that they describe that as 1997 to 2012, which was a much broader age bracket than I expected. But I thought it was super interesting that they very much compared that to the boomers, and
Mm-hmm.
they said basically that sports marketing and, like, sports business as a whole had been determined by the boomers. And
Yes.
by that they meant, white male boomers. But anyway, I'll pass it back to you.
No, that's very true. And I think, just again, the one thing that this really left me with was feeling so optimistic about young people.
Well, I love the
And
Gen Zers. A lot of
yeah,
younger generations I'm not a big fan of, but the Gen Zers are amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and they talked a lot about equity and values
Mhm.
and authenticity in this report, and going back to like what Gen Zers are looking for. And one of the things that I guess I was a little sad by, but also like, hey, us too, is that there are a lot of us out there who I feel the very same
That's
way.
true. Yeah, that's
Right. So I think
yeah.
we also need to grab on to some of us non Gen Zers and include us in this big pool, because we're on board and we're driving this too. And that's one of the reasons I brought up these YouTube examples in my update, because I wanted to show that, one of the things they keep talking about is how women's sports fans are really savvy, because we
Yes,
have to
we
be.
have to be. Yeah.
And now those outlets are becoming more and more available, and more people are using them. We're a perfect example.
Yeah.
Like, we're
Yeah.
on YouTube too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I really, really like that. One of the other things that stood out to me is the fact that they cite another report that talked about how so many people, a huge percentage of people would watch women's sports if they were more available on television. And this is something you and I talk about. It's our vending machine
Yeah.
example with Cheryl Cookie, is that, if you made this available to people, they would watch it. If I can go to a YouTube channel and watch a women's boxing match, I will go do that. If it isn't on television, I won't.
Right. Right.
It's very simple.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of reminding me of, sort of the mind switch that needs to happen, because we are asking. I mean, this report talks about, like, really disrupting
Yes.
the
Yeah.
way that we have pictured sports media, sports sponsorship. And I think that's the problem that we haven't solved yet, is that, the people in power are these white males, and they just cannot fathom anything other than what exists, because what exists is so perfect for them.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it serves them so well.
Yeah.
But there is this greater and greater groundswell. And then there are these young people, and we've talked about this before, Elizabeth, but you see it more and more, where they just aren't having it.
They
And
just
they
aren't having
aren't
it.
having it. And then they're going and doing something about it because they can.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's so exciting. I was also thinking about what we talked about last week, was the young girls who worked out at the track in their sports bras, and chaos ensued,
Mhm.
and they were suspended and this and that. That story's been picked up all over the
Oh,
place. They
yeah,
have almost 50,000 signatures on their petition that so these are high school kids.
yeah,
And they are not standing for it. I just love it.
yeah, yeah. It did
So, yeah,
it did make me question. I mean, it one of the things that I thought about reading this was sort of this, this excitement of the Gen Zers who are able to use social media, and then the thing that we've talked about in the past, with, in relation to NIL, is
yeah,
where it goes awry. And
yes.
so I think it's really interesting, like, how is that all going to sort of pan out? Because I think where it goes awry is where it's not being totally disrupted. It's being sort of semi disrupted. Okay, we're going to use social media, but really we're still looking back at this old boomer white guy model, and we're not totally disrupting it and making it for us.
Right. And I was thinking about that too, because we're still working within systems that are very much controlled by
Right,
the same types of people in this. It's a very similar structure,
right,
right?
right,
Like who's running Instagram, who's
right.
running
No, no, no,
Facebook,
right, right, right,
who's
right,
running Twitter.
right,
So I think that those things are important to recognize.
right.
And broadcast television still holds a lot of sway.
Oh, it totally
So,
does. It's the same
right.
as newspapers. Everybody
Yes.
poo-poos newspapers, and they hold a lot of sway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the New York Times is still an incredibly powerful entity, and they will be for a
For
long
yeah,
time. They
yeah,
may be losing market share, but they are still hugely,
huge.
hugely influential. And so is, like the NFL is still the biggest moneymaker in the world.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, they're very, very wealthy and they're very, very powerful.
right.
So I think they can't be ignored. And so I wanted to say to your point of that this is the future. This is not the present.
Yeah. I also, I think I was glad that they mentioned Athletics Unlimited, because to me it's like a big structural thing that is taking on this new way of looking at athletes, sponsorship, blah blah blah, and it's run by a man. And so I just think
Yeah.
it's really fascinating that he's taking this on. And I think he's taking it, from what I've heard him on a few interviews, that he's taking it on because he's interested in women's sports and blah blah blah, but he's also taking it on because it makes good business sense.
Absolutely.
He expects
Yeah.
to make a lot of money.
Right. Because there is there. Where people say there's no there there. Here there is much there.
Yeah,
And we
exactly.
all know it. And it's just a matter of who can figure out how to capitalize on it the best.
I think it's
Um,
it's it's also about who's going to make the move first. Who's going to say,
Absolutely.
"F this old model. This is silly. We're losing money," and that's
Yeah.
what he did. And he, like when it started. Honestly, when it started, it looked stupid.
Say it how it is.
I know it did. It looked stupid, and now like based on this report. I mean, I hadn't followed along that well, but he has sponsorship from major people now, and is on major networks and also on social media networks. So yeah,
Well,
there.
and I honestly, I really am wondering with some of these smaller outlets. Like I follow a few smaller outlets that cover uh, running races, and I'm just wondering at what point they're going to get bought,
Good point. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, and an entity like Just Women's Sports, will ESPN make a bid for them at some point?
right,
I don't know.
right.
So I think these are interesting things to follow. I think that we're going to see some interesting changes in the near future.
Yeah,
The one other thing that I wanted to bring up is also the sponsorship part of this, because this
yeah,
report, and this is very interesting because this is where the money is, and this is how athletes make a living a lot of times is through sponsorship deals. And they talked a lot about how sponsors are really looking for more authentic engagement. And this is something that women are very good at presenting to the world through social media. And that it's not so much this advertising, like putting up a logo and just having that be the messaging, that it's
right.
much more about this engagement and how women are really good at engaging. And this is really, really valuable for sponsors.
There also, it's been shown that women are very loyal to
Yes.
companies that do support women's sports. So I've always been curious about that. Like what's the direct relationship between advertising and purchasing. But according to this report and other reports I've read, is that women definitely are buying from the companies, that are supporting women's sports.
Yeah, and there is definitely this like community model and getting people engaged and really loyal to the brand. And I see
Yeah.
this with brands like, say, Oiselle, where they have great social media engagement. They're very concerned about social issues, and they're really a values-based company.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, they make a great product. And and the same with a company like Tracksmith. And, so there are these companies where you can point to and it's like, well, they're
I'll
doing it.
I'll agree with you, but I'll also point out that Budweiser,
Yes.
supported the soccer, and I just heard on a podcast that they ran out of Bud Light. Like any but bar that was showing the game and like as sort of the sponsor event, they were selling out.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'll be curious to see how the future pans out, but it's very
Yes.
exciting.
It is. It's very exciting, and we're going to stay with the positive, and we are going to sign off for today.
On a
And
positive note.
exactly, whoa, we did it. And I am Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports Podcast, and I'm here with Cherie Turner from Strides Forward Podcast, and we will see you next week. Bye bye.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.